She lay silent, waiting as she had been trained to wait, until at last the dawn stole into the room. Even then she waited until she had dressed herself, though she would not break the moon-dark fast until the crescent could be seen tonight in the evening sky. Then she called her attendant priestess and said, "Bring the Lady Morgane to me." When Morgane came, she noted that the younger woman had dressed herself in the garb of a priestess of the highest rank, her hair high and braided, the small sickle-shaped knife hanging from its black cord. Vivienne's mouth moved in a dry smile, and when they had greeted each other and Morgane sat beside her, she said, "Twice now the moon has darkened. Tell me, Morgane, has the horned one of the grove quickened your womb?" Morgane looked quickly at her, the glance of some small frightened thing in a snare. Then the young woman said, angry and defiant, "You told me yourself that I should use my own judgment. I have cast it forth." "You have not," said Vivienne, steadying her voice to complete detachment. "Why should you lie to me? I say you shall not." "I will!" Vivienne felt the power in the girl for a moment as Morgane rose swiftly from the bench. It seemed to her that she had grown suddenly tall and imposing. But it was a priestess trick, and Vivienne knew it too. There are so many. Actually, my favorite is not a novel, but a collection of short stories, or a lot of collections of short stories. But I guess for a novel, it might be The Mists of Avalon that I was reading from.
Why?
Because it takes one away from one's day-to-day world into an entirely different place where entirely different rules apply. In The Mists of Avalon, women do have roles of power. In the particular part of society where that scene takes place, women are supreme. It's a matriarchal society. And that is the village or community of the priestesses. There are women who are in more traditional roles in other parts of the kingdom of the novel, but there are also women who are very, very powerful out there as well. There are several characters in the anthology of short stories that I was talking about that are very, very strong because they are independent, problem solvers, and they tend not to sit around and wait for somebody else to do something. The characters in, say, The Mists of Avalon are, some of them are very strong, but a lot of them are bound by their roles in the society, whereas in the Borderland anthologies, they are not so much bound because the roles or the rules of society are breaking down in that world. That, it varies so much from one novel to another, even from one character to another. There's certainly a lot of novels where women play a very minor role. If you look at the Lord of the Rings trilogy, that there are very few female characters in that at all. And those that are there, their roles are not that critical, except in that they may offer some important piece of information at some point in the quest. If you look at something like the Game of Thrones, say, women do play critical parts in that, but I'm not entirely happy with the way they're written. Their voice in the stories doesn't seem quite right somehow. Well, I think it's very difficult to write from one gender to another. I think that's a very challenging thing to do. And so there's a much greater chance that there's a lack of verisimilitude if you've got a man writing a woman's thoughts, or a woman writing a man's thoughts, for that matter. Well, I mean, the fantasy genre is almost always focused on heroic acts. You know, there's always dragons or, you know, some kind of threat that they're having to rise up and, you know, so it looks towards warrior types, but that is not, it's not always the case, but that tends to be the way of the genre. And then again, that's another reason why I really like these Borderlands series, is they are looking at problem solving in an alternate universe. It's almost a little bit steampunk, because they're trying to live and make things happen. So yeah, the Borderlands series is similar to steampunk in that they are living in a liminal space between the human world and the elven world. And so technology from the human world doesn't work the way it should, and magic from the elven world doesn't work the way it should. And a lot of the stories have to do with problem solving involving making up solutions. It's almost, these people are constantly MacGyvering things together to make them work, to solve another problem, but it's a very big element in it. The people that can problem solve and can think and can communicate well tend to be the heroes in the story rather than people that fight. I think the fantasy authors are in general drawn towards adventure and sort of, but not conventional adventure, if that makes any sense. They're not looking for, they're not writing war stories. If they were drawn towards that, they'd be writing war stories, but they want things that have elements of magic and mystery and otherworldliness. The tendency to have dragons and evil wizards and so on, I guess, you know, they're trying to captivate the reader, and they find that kind of story enjoyable. Other series like the Marion Zimmer Bradley series around King Arthur, and Mary Stewart also wrote a similar series, they are captivated by the legends of the time and trying to work through and make sense of them and retell them in an interesting way. Well, as I said, I think it's more difficult for a man to write a woman's thoughts or for a woman to write a man's thoughts. They tend to project their own ideas of the person in the way they describe them. I mean, women never describe themselves the way a male fantasy writer would describe a woman. You know, they never think of their slim waist or their ample breasts or the curve of their spine. You know, they're in the body, and they probably have things they don't like about it, and so they'd never describe themselves that way, although a lot of fantasy writers, male ones, will talk about the female character as though she's thinking this about herself. And I think maybe sometimes the female authors do the same thing to male characters. You know, the bulge of his biceps or whatever. I haven't noticed it to quite as great an extent. Also, I think there's a lot more introspection in a lot of female writers. They tend to be more centered in what their characters are feeling and their reactions to situations. And I think that the male authors, in general, I mean, generalizations are never very good, but there tends to be more of a focus on outward motion and action and less on introspection and contemplation. Sure, Marion Zimmer Bradley, Mary Stewart, Terry Windling, Emma Bull, Holly Black, Ellen Kushner. That's all that come to mind immediately. I mean, I have lots of books that were written by women fantasy writers, but I can't think of their names right off the top of my head, other than those ones.